10 authors and 10 books that I'm going to treat myself to for my birthday. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And today I am going to talk about 10 authors that I absolutely love that I really need to read more books by. Because I buy most of my books secondhand, and because a lot of my reading is dictated by reading challenges, I don't make my way through the back catalogue of any one particular author, but there are authors that I really love and that I really want to read more from. So disclaimer first, these books will firstly definitely not be getting read this year. I will try and build as many of them into my reading next year, but I just thought it would be really nice to look at authors that I've enjoyed but maybe haven't given enough attention to. And it's my birthday this month, and I thought a nice treat to myself might be to pick a book from each of the authors that I'm going to discuss today and buy myself one of their books to celebrate turning 36. So the first author that I really want to read more from is Sarah Moss. I just read Summerwater, and I won't go into too much detail about that book just now. I discussed it quite a lot in my April wrap-up, but needless to say, I absolutely adored it. I think her writing style is completely what I like about writing. In that story of a number of different people staying in a holiday park in Scotland on one day, she managed to build up a lot of characters, make a lot of social commentary, and really wrap you up in a story that incorporated nature and a twist. And I think that book is brilliant. So I don't know how I haven't read more from Sarah Moss, because she has written quite a lot of books. She's obviously very much in my wheelhouse, like they say on Book Riots, and she's a Ouija. So, I mean, why have I not read her before? Her books have obviously clicked with me, because when I went onto Goodreads, I actually had a couple of her books clicked as books that I want to read. So selecting which one I am going to buy was a little bit difficult, but I've gone with Night Waking. It's her highest average rated book on Goodreads, but more than that, it speaks to me on quite a lot of levels. It's about an exhausted mother of a toddler and a 7-year-old, who is struggling with her responsibilities and weighing them against her desire to work and be alone, which I can, maybe not so much the working part, but I'm very introverted. I like to be a bit of a loner, and motherhood does clash with that quite a lot. But this book also seems to have a dual timeline running that's told in letters that are found from, I think it's 100 years ago, and they were written by a midwife, which I was in a previous life. It's set on a desolate Scottish island. I think it's in the Hebrides. So, you know, I obviously love Scottish books. I say that all the time. I know my accent doesn't really give it away, but I am Scottish. And both these timelines seem to be linked by a bit of a mystery. It's the discovery of the skeleton of a baby in the garden, which sounds a little bit gruesome, but I don't tend to steer away from things like that as long as they're done sensitively. And I think from what I've read of Sarah Moss so far, that it's in capable hands. So Night Waking is definitely going in my birthday basket. The next author is Diane Setterfield, and I have read I think she's got 3 published novels, and I've read 2 of them already. So the first one I read was The 13th Tale. I talked about this a little bit on my shelf tour, and I'll link all the other videos that I talk about just in case you're interested in any of the particular books. But I thought The 13th Tale was just delicious. It's gothic and it's mysterious, and it goes into a lot of the family dynamics of quite a complex family, and I was just blown away by it when I read it. So I was lucky enough to get an advanced copy of Once Upon a River last year, and I'm always a bit nervous about reading books by someone whose work I have really loved, because oh my god, like what if they don't live up to my expectations? And I suppose that's kind of a thing I should be considering this whole video. But Once Upon a River really delivered. It's a very different setting It's a very different time, but it has the same elements of mystery and gothic touch, but it's also got a little bit of magic in it, and just think she's a phenomenal author. So I'll be buying her middle novel, which is called Bellman and Black, and honestly it sounds just as strong as her other two. William Bellman seems to live a kind of blessed life. He's successful, he has a happy marriage, he has lovely children, but those around him start to die. First it's distant relatives, but then it's his wife and most of his children, and at each of the funerals he notices a stranger in black. And when he is left with only one of his children, the stranger approaches him at his wife's graveside and makes a business proposition. So already I'm intrigued. I want to know who this stranger is. Is it tied to the raven that he accidentally killed when he was 10 years old? What's the business? Why are these people dying? And I just know it's going to be a brilliant read. The third author on my list is Magda Szabo. I read her book The Door last year. I actually listened to it as an audiobook. It really got me. I thought it was perfection. I'd actually picked it up for a reading challenge prompt that was something about your ancestry, and I have Hungarian roots on my mother's side, and she was really the only Hungarian author I could find. So it was probably serendipitous that I found her, because it turned out to be one of the best books that I read. On the surface, The Door is about the relationship between a young writer and her cleaner, but it is so much more than that. The cleaner, Emerence, is like a living enigma. She's confusing and complicated, and she's the powerful beating heart of this story. She won't let anyone cross her threshold, and I was really compelled to find out what her story was, as told through the eyes of our flawed but really honest narrator, the young writer. The layers of complexity of female relationships are really exposed in this book, and how they're bound together by love and reliance, and then the book's made more rich by this mystery and possibly the best doggy character that I've ever read. No offence, Greyfriars Bobby. This book just gripped me, and it broke me, and it kept me hooked the whole way through. I absolutely adored it. So I took a look through Magda Szabo's catalogue on Goodreads. She does have a memoir, which I will probably want to read at some point, but I thought I would stick with her fiction, and I'm going to get a book called Abigail. So this is different. It's the story of a teenager. It's set in the World War II years, which is something that I always want to read about. Gina, the main character, is kind of, I think she's a bit of a spoilt brat. She's the apple of her widower father's eye, but when he's sent away on a mission, she's sent to a strict religious boarding school, which she's having none of. She rebels, she tries to run away, and ends up getting herself in a lot of trouble. So she turns to the Abigail of the title, which I gather is some sort of statue in the school grounds, that you can give your worries and concerns to, and this triggers the biggest adventure of her life, apparently. So I think that sounds like it's going to be fun. I do like a kind of coming of age story, and I don't mind a kind of bratty character who I may or may not enjoy, because the story sounds like it's going to be quite a strong one. My next author is Daphne Du Maurier, because I recently read Rebecca, and you can hear my thoughts in detail on that in my April wrap up. But needless to say, I thought the story was captivating. I thought she really wove together the insecurities of the main character, the mystery of Rebecca's death, all in a delicious gothic package. After I read Rebecca, I went and watched the Hitchcock adaptation, which I really enjoyed. And when I went through her back catalogue on Goodreads, I realised that she's the author of another Hitchcock film, The Birds, which I saw when I was, I don't know, like 13 or something, and I have never trusted birds since. So I thought there'd be a nice symbiosis there. I've read her book and watched an adaptation, and now I've seen an adaptation, I'm going to read her book. This is also a short story, and the version I'm going to buy is in a collection of other short stories, so it'll be interesting to see how I like her in short form compared to Rebecca, which is quite a big novel. Next up is Arundhati Roy, who wrote The God of Small Things. I talk about this in my pretty covers video, so I will link link that below. But that's one of my favourite books. It's a family saga told through the eyes of children. You know from the start that something devastating has happened, and it builds up through that in the story. I think her writing style is quite lyrical in places. I think it's really beautiful, and when I look through her Goodreads catalogue, I noticed she has written a lot of non-fiction, which I will probably look at in future, but I want to stick with her novels. So I picked The Ministry of Upmost Happiness, and there is so much India in this book. It's not set in one location, it's not focusing on one character or even one family, and that really appeals to me. My brother and I had planned to go to India this year together. He was doing other travelling, and then I was going to go out and meet him. Thankfully, we hadn't got as far as booking anything or making any solid plans before coronavirus affected us all. But I think even once this is cleared, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I do still plan to go to India at some point. I've always been fascinated with the country. I've read quite a few books set there, and this book just sounds perfect. It's applying the family saga touch from The God of Small Things to a whole country. I've heard really good things about this, so I can't wait to see how that plays out. My fifth author is Nicole Krauss. I read The History of Love a few years ago, and I absolutely adored it. And funny fact, I bought this secondhand, and it comes from Surrey Libraries. And I lived in Surrey for about half of my childhood, and a lot of my reading was shaped by the books that I took out from Surrey Libraries. And now I live like 8 hours away, and one of my favourite books has come from that library, so that's quite cool. I talk about The History of Love in the second part of my book tour videos that I put up last week. So I won't labour the point here, but what I really love about it are the elements of, there's a coming of age story, there's also a heartbreaking love story in there, and it's just really touchingly written. I was crying by like the 10th page or something when I read it, and I don't tend to cry at books. I will greet away at films, but I don't tend to cry at books for some reason. But this one did it. So I have chosen Greathouse, which was her next highest rated book on Goodreads after The History of Love. And like The History of Love, there is a World War II persecution element. There's an element of people's legacy and strangers being linked by an item. But in this case, the item is a writing desk, and the story focuses more on loss rather than love. I'd never heard of this book before, and really I haven't ever seen anyone mentioning The History of Love very much. So I think she's quite an under the radar writer, but I don't think that's a reflection of how good a writer is. So again, I'm really looking forward to this one. Next up is Sara Perry, who wrote The Essex Serpent. I talked about this book in my Pretty Covers video because of course I did. It's gorgeous. This book has elements of mystery with a mythological kind of touch. The characters are amazingly well crafted. I love how she builds their relationships in this book, and I have picked Melmoth, which is higher rated than her only other book besides these two. So Helen, the main character, is quite dismissive of the folklore around Malmuth the Witness, who apparently travels the earth and persuading souls to join her and then dooms them to an existence of damnation and solitude. But when her friend disappears after discovering a note that references Melmoth, Helen maybe isn't quite so sure. So this has some similar sounding elements to The Essex Serpent, but it also sounds very different. I think it might be set in modern times as well, which is different as The Essex Serpent is set in Victorian times. So that's another one going in the birthday basket. My next writer is Chinelo Okparanta. She wrote Under the Udala Trees, which I read last year, which is set in Nigeria. I thought this was a really special book. It combines the story of a young lesbian woman in Nigeria with the political and religious culture around the time of the Civil War. It deals with some serious topics: the persecution of gay people, the death of a parent, violence against children, but even considering all of that, it's actually not a dark or dense book. And I think that's down to the voice of the main character, who questions the things around her but doesn't internalise the hate or the negativity, particularly around her sexuality. She's strong and she's brave, but I often find that women in novels who have those traits can be quite cold, and she absolutely isn't. So I've picked Chinelo Okparanta's debut novel, which is also set in Nigeria, but it incorporates the immigrant experience in America as well, and I really enjoy reading about the immigrant experience. Obviously, it's not something that's ever touched my life, so I think it's really important to understand those perspectives. Gayness does play a part, but it's not prominent. It was prominent in Under the Udala tree and not dominating, but I think this one has an even wider scope, so I'll be tracking down that as well. Author number 8 is Ernaux, who wrote Cleaned Out. I discussed this a bit in I think that was the second video of my bookshelf tour as well. This is the story of a girl, I think it's set in the 60s, who has a backstreet abortion and how she feels afterwards. It talks a lot about family relationships. It's a very honest book, and actually when I first read it I thought it was a memoir, but it isn't. It's a book of fiction. So I've decided to go with a memoir, and it's called A Woman's Story, and it's a memoir, but it's really a biography of her mother, who passed away with dementia, and Ernaux decided to tell her mother's story. And if she was as raw and honest sounding in a novel, I can't wait to see how that plays out in this memoir. My next author is Eowyn Ivey, who wrote The Snow Child. I read this, I don't know, about maybe 6 years ago, and I didn't know until I read it that I love a wilderness story. The Snow Child is set in Alaska in the 20s, and a couple trying to set up their own homestead. They build a child out of snow, and in the morning it's gone, but there is a young blonde girl that they glimpse living in the wild, and this is the story of how she becomes part of their family. There's a love story in it. I just thought it was magical, and yes, that word again, beautiful. It was the book that made me realise that fairy tales don't need to be confined to childhood, and occasionally I do really like a fairy tale retelling. So I went into Eowyn's Goodreads catalogue and I went for the book that was higher rated than Snow Child, so that's promising. It's called To the Bright Edge of the World, and again it's set in Alaska in an earlier time, and it's about a pregnant newlywed wife whose husband is sent away on a commission to navigate the Wolverine River, and she's left alone in military barracks, concerned about her pregnancy and concerned about their future, which it doesn't sound like it has any magical elements to it, but I think I trust in the writing style of Owen Ivy enough that I think this will be quite a good read. And wrapping up with number 10 is Janet Fitch, who wrote White Oleander, which is, this book really surprised me actually. I hadn't expected it to be as great as it was. I think it's lucky I'm not the sort of person who highlights passages in books, because this would maybe just be one big highlight. It's the story of Astrid, whose mother is like this intense poet and is sent to prison for murdering her lover, and Astrid is then shoved into the foster care system and dealt some pretty horrible hands, whilst also trying to define herself and the relationship that she has with her mother. Astrid is defined both by her experiences and how she survives them, and I thought some horrible things happen to her, but nothing in this book is shock for shock's sake. The characters in it are vivid, and even in Astrid's darkest moments I still really felt for her. So I have picked Paint It Black, mainly because the title spoke to me. My dad used to play the Rolling Stones quite a lot when I was younger. So this book has a similar theme of relationships with mothers, but main character Josie's relationship is actually with her boyfriend's mother. He has died and his mother blames Josie for his death, and they're thrown together by events. I think we watch how their relationship plays out. Like White Oleander, it's set in LA, but this sounds very different. It's more set in the rock scene rather than the foster care system, but I think it's going to have similar tough elements to work through. But like I said, in White Oleander there was no shock just for the sake of it, and I think that this could be quite a compelling read as well. So that's 10 authors and 10 books that I'm going to treat myself to for my birthday. If you've read any of the authors or any of the books that I've mentioned, drop me a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, then I would really like it if you could like the video and subscribe, because I put up a new booktube video every Saturday and I would love to have you join me for it. But until next time, bye.